Hi Claire, I think you're on mute there.
Thank you so much. Hello, welcome back. I hope you've all had a fabulous break and a recharge for our next session, which I know will be extremely interesting. So myself and Tristram, I did a postgraduate at Manchester University. I read a lot of his stuff then because it was in careers education and guidance. And I've worked in schools in the UK and across the Middle East in this area. And we nearly did a project together in a Middle Eastern country a few years back. And I've been following Tristram's stuff for a very long time because especially the focus on equality, which is close to my heart. And there is some amazing research that he's been involved with. So we really appreciate having you as an expert here with us, and I've made you co-host, and thank you for being here, and over to you, Tristram.
Great, well thank you. I'm just going to try and share my screen and let's see how we go. How's that? People see that okay? Yeah, great. And let me see, I was planning at some point to shuffle people into groups if that works, but I can't. I'm trying to spot where to do that.
I can always do that for you.
Perhaps I'll ask you to do that. It depends how we go for time and stuff as well. Sure. I'd be really interested actually just for a quick sort of I don't know whether we could just ask if one or two people could just tell us sort of what sort of backgrounds people are here. Are people all career coaches? Are some people in HR departments? Are some people working in schools or colleges? What's the sort of spread that we've got here?
Type in the chat box or take yourself off mute and share with us.
So, I mean, hopefully some of what I'm going to be saying will be of interest to people sort of regardless of what kind of background they come from. But it's always interesting to know, because I think some of our opportunities to work with clients and to deal with some of the challenges that they experience, you know, are very contextual. And I suppose one of the arguments that I'm going to sort of make today is that we're in a very is that we need to be mindful of the context that we're working in. So it sounds like we've got a mixture of people here who are coaches, academics, mentors, some working in organizations, some outside of organizations. And all of this, I think, is going to make a difference to what sort of opportunities you have to work with people and to think about social justice. But I'm going to give you a bit of time to think about that as we go on. So I suppose where we start is the idea that life isn't fair, and that one of the things that we do when we have the idea of social justice is it's a kind of response to that idea, the idea that, well, you know, we all know, I mean, we all know life isn't fair. We all know that, you know, there are some people who get on because of their background or because of who they are, or just because of just plain luck. It doesn't even have to be for any reason. That some people have more successful careers than others, and it's not always about the merit or the best people. And so that's really, you know, that can be really frustrating. And I often get frustrated myself, because you think, well, you know, that person's been promoted. Why are they being promoted? And sometimes you can spot it. It's because, you know, they you know, fit in better. They've come from a better school or background. They perhaps know the boss outside of work, and that can make us quite angry. And I suppose social justice gives us a way of thinking about that in a way that hopefully can be helpful. So when we think about this term social justice, it's obviously made up of two words. So firstly, we've got the idea of the social. So the idea that and in our context of our career, that we're living our careers with other people. It's not just an individual thing. The idea of social justice is that there should be some level of fairness across society, between individuals, within institutions. And so this idea of the social, the group, the people around us is a really important idea. And then obviously the idea of justice, this idea of fairness. Now, we can define justice in lots of different ways, and that's something that we might want to talk about. But I think we certainly tend to be better at spotting where we see injustice than often we are of defining justice. So sometimes we see things in our workplaces or in our schools where we think, well, that's not right. There's something needs to be done about that. And I suppose social justice is a way of helping us to think about that. Oh, sorry, here we go. So, I seem to have put some things where it's moving the slides on in these. I was going to bring this quote up from Angela Davis, which says, sorry about this, where she says, "I'm fed up with accepting the things I can't change. I want to try and change the things I can't accept." And so I think that's another idea that's really important in social justice, that there might be things which are wrong in the world, which often we just sort of encourage people to manage and get on with, and there's not a lot you can do about it. And what Angela Davis was saying in that example was, well, actually, sometimes you actually need to think, when you're talking to people, you need to think about what needs to be changed. And social justice, one of the right reasons I like it is partly because it is a bit vague, and it brings together lots of different terms and lots of different things that we're probably concerned about, different kinds of prejudice, different structural inequalities, things by which different groups might be discriminated against. And we've got lots of examples on this slide, and you might feel differently about all or some of them, but you probably recognize some of these things that perhaps you might feel, well, it's wrong perhaps for women to have a different experience in the workplace, or for women to have a different place in society than men just because they're women, or it's wrong for perhaps older people or younger people to be discriminated against, and so on. Now, depending on what you think about all these issues, your definition of social justice is probably going to be a bit different from other people. So this is one of the things that we have to think about. I'm going to talk a bit about this in a second. Hold on, right. Let me just try and remove some of these terrible, I don't know how that's happened. I think somehow I must have jumped onto some of your slides or something, and they've got some transitions in it. So let me just remove all of those.
If anyone's got any thoughts so far in the presentation, put your comments in the chat box. It's certainly making me think about when I was told that you won't go any further up the ladder in this school because of your accent. There's so many interesting things that we experience over time.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different issues, and in each country, in each culture, we're going to see different kinds of issues being important. But the fact that there is fairness and unfairness is probably something that everybody in every country will recognise to some extent. So one of the ways that I've found really helpful in thinking about this, when you start to think about this as an individual, when you start to think about if you're perhaps working with a member of staff or a coaching client, and you want to think about, well, how do people actually experience this? There's a theorist called Iris Marion Young, and she's come up with what she calls the faces of oppression. And we've been working a lot with that in some of the work that we've been doing in kind of career guidance and career support. And what she says is, well, when you think about how this feels, this sense of unfairness feels from the point of view of an individual, it tends to take one of these forms. So she says, well, it can be about exploitation. So it can be that sense that, well, I'm not fairly paid. I have to do things I don't want to do. I don't get what I deserve for the work that I do. That sense of being exploited. That's one sort of set of feelings that people have. Another is a sense of marginalization, of, well, loss of work, power and respect. I'm pushed to the edge. You know, I'm in this organization, I'm working here, but I'm never really right in the middle of it. It's always, I don't really have power and control. I'm always sort of pushed to the edge of it. And that links then to this idea of powerlessness. So it's always somebody else telling me what to do. I never get the chance either to decide what to do for myself or perhaps to input on how other people behave. And then she talks about the idea of cultural imperialism, which is a bit tricky, but I'll try and unpack it, which is basically the idea that somebody else tells you not just what to do at work, but also who to be and how to be. So Claire's example of the accent is a really good example where somebody perhaps is saying, well, you know, it's not really I've got a problem with how you're doing your job, but I just wish you were a bit more like me. I wish you just spoke a bit more like me, or you dressed a bit more like me, or whatever. So you have these cultural norms that we're imposing on people. And obviously there's a need for some norms in society, but sometimes we can experience that as forms of oppression. So, you know, for somebody who you know, wants to wear their hair long and is told that that's not appropriate, and there's loads of examples of this, particularly in America, where there's a lot of legal cases about sort of racialized assumptions about, you know, how your hair should look, and maybe there's certain styles that are typically worn by Black people that perhaps the company says, well, that's not smart, that's not, and the people who wear their hair like that, so well, that's how I want to do it, that's how people like me tend to like to do it. So why are you making me, you know, dress, act, speak the way that you want me to speak? So, and then finally, obviously, there's the example when we experience oppression, it might be because of, we might be experiencing violence, actual violence. And when we're talking about violence here, we're not just talking about someone coming up and actually sort of punching you in the face, which, you know, obviously, you know, we do within workplaces and within learning organizations, you do occasionally experience forms of actual violence, but you're also talking about things like sexual harassment. You're also talking about things like bullying, workplace bullying, which might be very verbal, but still is experienced by the individual as violence. So what we're saying is we take these kind of, I suppose, slightly abstract ideas of social justice, all these different, you know, isms, feminism, ageism, and so on that we see, and we might feel we're against those or don't have a problem with those or whatever. But when we start to talk to individuals, we start to see how this is experienced in people's lives, and this framework of oppression is quite a helpful one, I think, because it really gets to how does it feel. Now, I do a lot of work with corporate firms in the UK, and diversity and inclusion is a really big issue. Like, you know, I think quite genuinely these firms. So this is from our survey that we did last year, and we say, you know, how much of a priority within your organisation are diversity, so gender, ethnicity, social class, disability. You know, how much do you care about this? And pretty much all the organisations will tell us, yeah, we do care about this. You know, different degrees for each of these, but you know, most organisations are giving a high or medium priority to most of these things. So gender, ethnicity, social class, disability, gay and transgender rights. They're all saying it's wrong within our firm for somebody who has one of these characteristics to feel that they don't fit in. And then the final one we asked about, which is, you know, less addressed, but is important as well, as neurodiversity. So people with autism, people who think perhaps a little bit differently from normal, and so on. And most corporate organizations would say, yeah, we care about this. We don't think it's right that people who have these characteristics shouldn't be treated right, and they shouldn't be able to build a career in our organization. There's a bit of a hierarchy about what they care about most. But one of the things is, what are these organizations actually doing about some of these things? And this is, I think, one of the things that we need to think about is, it's very easy to say you care about this. It's you know, a good step, a really positive step that firms can take is to do some monitoring and say, well, actually, you know, we say we care about gender, but How many women get to the boardroom, get to senior positions? Do we know that? If we don't know that, well, actually in Britain now we have to report on some of those things, but you know, maybe we're not doing the same monitoring for ethnicity, so we don't know how many people from an ethnic minority background are perhaps rising up through our organisation. And so that's a useful thing to do, but what else can we do? What sort of approaches can we take to supporting people in their careers as they're going through the organisation that might make some of these things, some of these characteristics easier for people to sort of progress and develop their careers with. So what I thought we'd do is if we kind of just break into groups maybe of maybe 3 or 4, something like that. What I'd like you to talk about is like, what are the big social justice or diversity issues in your organisation? And people here are probably from a range of different countries, so I would expect them to be, you know, to be quite different. But also what we've seen in the work, the research that we've done with the corporate firms that I work with quite a lot, is that those issues can really be quite different from one organisation to another. So of course you'd expect national differences, but you probably don't expect so much that in one law firm, say, people who are gay are doing fine and not having any problems, and in another one they're reporting all sorts of prejudice and discrimination, and you know, and so on and so on. So a lot of these are very particular. So let's have a talk about, what do you think the big sort of diversity and social justice issues are in your organisation? And if you've got any ideas about what you're doing about that, then it'd be great for you to share that as well. But let's just split just for maybe 5 minutes or so and hear what people have got to say.
Sure. So I'll put people in rooms and see you back in 5 minutes.
Great. Have we got most people back now? Yeah.
Looking at the chat, yes.
Great. Okay. So, I mean, some really interesting stuff in the group that I was just in, where people are talking about all sorts of different issues. So people were talking about how discrimination and sort of inequalities, injustices are working in their organisations on the grounds of religion, on gender, on race, on marital status, on whether you have children or not. And then also noticed in the chat, someone was talking about the digital divide. So that there's actually, you know, it's a new thing, perhaps not so important in the workplace, but really important in education, is this idea that, well, some people have access to, you know, high quality broadband, good IT equipment, and other people don't. And in a world which is so digital, it's really difficult for us, for some of those people to manage. And so that's a kind of another big diversity or social justice issue. People are highlighting ageism. And one of the things that I think is interesting is that in some of these issues, you find that there are people from sort of both sides of the question. So a lot of young people will say, well, I don't feel we're treated fairly because we're young. And then older workers will also say, well, I don't feel we're treated fairly because we're older. And a lot of it is about people making assumptions about certain people, what they can do and how they can behave and so on. So one of the things that is challenging about this is that there are so many of these different issues that we end up in a position where it can often be seen as, well, we have to play off the interests of one group against another. And that can be in a, you know, sometimes that can be in quite an aggressive way. You see, perhaps, I mean, people would say perhaps in America at the moment, you see some of that playing out in the election. So you see perhaps white working class people who feel that they've not got enough opportunities, that their standard of living has been declining. Some of those people feel angry, and probably quite rightly so. And they then say, well, you know, we shouldn't be focusing on the situation for Black people, who would probably, when you look at it, would also be feeling a lot of the very same things, But so you get this situation where sometimes, while we might think about all these different diversity strands, we actually get some of them are actually in tension. So people are actually saying, well, because of those people, we're worse off, and equally the people on the other side of the scales are feeling the same. So that's not very helpful, I think. And there's another version of it that's perhaps a little bit less aggressive, but it's still a problem, which I see a lot in corporate firms, which is you decide that when you're talking about diversity, or we haven't got time, for example, to talk about ethnicity or religion, that's not a big issue. This year we're focusing on gender, that's our big issue. So that gets all of the attention, all of the initiatives are about that, and then sometimes that creates resentment. So one of the things that I've been influenced by is another sort of theoretical idea, which is from a couple of theorists called Laclau and Mouffet. But what they talk about is what they call the chains of equivalence. So they say, well, everybody who has some of these issues, they've actually got things in common. And if we're going to build a strategy to try and deal with it, it's better for us not to say, well, look, let's deal with women first, and we can worry about ethnic minorities next, or gay people next. We have to say, well, we're trying to do something about this for everyone, because otherwise we tend to create this kind of resentment between groups. So we try and see what things we can do in helping people and in enabling their careers that are going to be useful to everyone. And we also try and see that people have got interests in common. We're all human beings. There's things that unite us and so on. So what has all this got to do with career, I suppose, is the next question. Well, I'll just talk a little bit about how I see career, and hopefully it will become clear as to why I think there is a strong link when we're trying to, if we recognize that there are these inequalities in life. Oh, you're not seeing the slides. Okay, let me try that again. Okay. There we go. Right. Okay. Yes. So when we see all these inequalities, when we see people having difficult time, we might not first think that the thing we need to do is to improve their careers. We might think, well, we need to get a new government, or we might need to put a new policy in, diversity policy into our organization or whatever. And of course all those things are important, but I think it's really important to think about career, and it's partly because I see career as a very broad thing which is very important to individuals. So career for me is the individual's journey through life, learning and work. It's where we actually interact with organizations and structures and wider society. And so we're pursuing our careers in relation to others, not just alone. And career isn't just about hierarchical progression. It's not just about moving up through an organization, although that's important. And it's important that ability to move up through an organization is not denied to some people. But it's also about how we divide our lives up, how we might spend time with our family, how we might attend to our well-being, as well as attending to our kind of financial and career progression. So when we're thinking about career, we're thinking about something which is both lifelong and life-wide, and that's one of its great powers as a concept, is that when we talk to somebody about their career, we're talking about decisions they're making day to day. So somebody is deciding whether to stay at work late today. They're deciding actually whether they want to perhaps challenge or call out that person for a racist comment that's been made in the workplace. They might be doing all sorts of things, and these are decisions you're making just day to day. And if we think about how people spend their days, then you kind of make a whole set of decisions, and certain things seem important. But why career is so important is that career decisions are about how you spend your day, but they're also about how you spend your life. So decisions you make day to day might have impacts for your lifelong career, your lifelong experience. So you decide to work harder today, hopefully that gets rewarded and you get paid back in the longer run. Equally, you decide to complain about someone making a racist comment about you, probably in the here and now, today, that's a hard thing to do, and you're probably going to find it's going to make your life more difficult. But what you're hoping is that in the long run, because you're giving people the perspective of the future, you're hoping that making those challenges, making those decisions are going to actually pay off for them in the long run. So career is helpful because it helps us to reorientate people's perspectives, to recognize what's going on in their day-to-day life, but also to help them to see what's going on over the longer run. And so career is something which is not just individual, and often we tend to think about career as a very individual thing, but it's actually a journey that we take through society with other people. So we pursue our careers, we're not alone, we don't, we work in institutions. Even if you're self-employed, you're working with a whole load of other people. And so your ability to pursue your career is not just a psychological decision, it's also a social decision. It's how you get on with other people, how you build your relationships with other people. And part of that is about challenging other people's behavior when you believe it's unfair. And as people who are working with people on their career, we should be sort of willing to help people to do that. And it's also about working with institutions. So whether that's workplaces, whether that's schools or universities, whether that's other kinds of social institutions, when people are pursuing their careers, they're running up against these structures, against these things that make certain aspects of their life easy and other aspects of their life difficult. So we try and help them to think about this. And one of the things that I think we're trying to do in coaching or in other forms of support that we might offer to people in their career is we're helping them both to work on themselves and think about themselves, to work on their relationships with other people, but also to work on their interactions with society at large and the institutions in which they operate. So in other words, our careers are exactly where social justice either takes place or where it doesn't take place. So that's something that we I think need to think about. So this raises the question, well, where can we intervene? And there's lots of levels, and this is a kind of basic sort of systems theory way of thinking about it, but we could if we thought about it more, it would become much more complicated because we've got lots of other things in here. But the first place we can intervene is the individual. We can help people to think about how they're going to respond to things. And one of the things that somebody in the group I was in talked about is that we're often talking about coping. So resilience and helping people to deal with difficult situations and to cope with that situation. And that's a really important and powerful strategy. But we also might want to think about how we might intervene in their team or their organization or in society as a whole. Because we're when we're thinking about helping people in their career, we're not only able to help people individually, we're also able to sort of think about how do they relate to the wider systems that they operate in. So I'm going to push on and then we'll perhaps pick up some questions at the end. So what I've got here is a little model that we've developed in some of the books that we've done, where we say what we've got is called 5 signposts towards socially just career guidance, and I think that this works to some extent for career coaching as well, and for people who are in other roles, so HR roles and so on. And so what we say is that you need to be careful not to locate all of the responsibility with the individual in the center of this picture. Now that's an important place. It's an important place that we can intervene, but it's not where you can solve every career problem. And I think there's been a danger that in the past, when we've talked to people about their careers, we've tended to say, well, it's all about you. And so that's about, self-belief and self-confidence and self-efficacy. And it's also about when things are wrong and when things are unfair and things are difficult, it then becomes being about resilience and adaptability and so on. These things are really important. They're really good strategies, but they are limited. So if we start to think about how do you operate in the wider environment, you might want to start to think about other ways to operate. So what I've got here is some what we call the 5 signposts. So these are strategies that we can use when we're working with people around their careers to try and help them to develop their careers in a way that acknowledges some of the injustices that people might face. So the first one is that we try and build critical consciousness. And so what we mean by that is that we help people to understand the world as it is. We want them to think about how are things organized. So not just to view it as being about me, but perhaps to become a bit analytical about how is my organization working? What are some of the power dynamics in it? What is the fairness and unfairness? Now, we might also want to think about, well, how could that be changed in a way that might address some of the problems that I'm experiencing? Doesn't mean you can always do it, of course. You can't always change everything. But what we can do is help people to think that through, because by doing that, we help them to recognize that it's not just because there's something wrong with them. There might be something going on that is structural in the way the organization works. And that might be something that they think about changing. It might be something where they think about leaving the organization. But at the very least, it's about understanding how things are working. Our second thing is the thing about naming oppression. And that's what we were starting to do when we broke into groups and then a really good example of this was the Me Too movement that we saw was, women have experienced all sorts of different harassment and prejudice for many, many years. But when groups of women got together and they came out and they said, actually, I've experienced this and this is an example of what I've experienced. So they named the thing that had happened to them. It really raised the attention to that. It really made organizations concerned about that, to think about how do we do something about that. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is always, that everything's been solved. And the same is true at the moment. We're seeing, certainly in my country and in America as well, we're seeing a similar thing with the Black Lives Matter movement, where people are saying, look, no, actually, there is still racism. You can't just tell us it doesn't exist. It is still there. There's something that we need to talk about. So that process of naming oppression, when you see it, is a really powerful one. And again, it helps the individual to recognize that some of the things that they might not like or that might not be going well in their career are not just their fault. They might also be for other reasons. And so if somebody's talking to you in a career coaching session, for example, you might want to suggest, that sounds an awful lot like sexism. Do you think that was sexism? And ultimately the individual needs to make their own mind up about that. But we can introduce that to them. We can help them to give a name to some of the things that they're experiencing. Then I talked about that idea of cultural imperialism. And the sort of response to it really is that we should question what's normal. Again, I think our role is to challenge individuals, to help them to think about what's normal, what do they assume, what might be the things that have come from their family or from the society around them or from their organization, and is that really what they want, and is that really what they believe? So, a classic example of this is where if someone comes to you and says, look, I think you're a clever lad, you could really go far in this company, you could be in a partner in 5 or 10 years. All of the assumptions are that is exactly what you would want to do. And you've got this sort of cultural assumptions being pushed on you that climbing the ladder, earning more money, being more powerful, achieving a sort of partnership role is what you should want to achieve. But maybe that individual doesn't want that. Maybe that's not what they're looking for from work. And so I think one of the things that we can be doing when we're working with people around their careers is helping them to challenge some of the things that's normal, to help them to think through some of the things that are normal. We also want to encourage people to work together. I mean, I made the point that career is not an individual activity already. And often when we think about career solutions, we tend to come up with things that you can do. So, you know, work harder, apply for more jobs, you know, network more, whatever. But actually we can achieve an awful lot when we work with others more. So the most simple way for this to work is that if you're talking to people, if you're in an HR department, or if you're a career coach, you're probably hearing the same story from loads of people. So you're probably hearing somebody say, actually, do you know, I've got real problems combining my work and family life. That probably comes up over and over again. And it would be really helpful if you were able to put those people in touch with each other, you know, obviously with their permission. Would it be useful for you to talk to somebody else who's in the same position? Maybe you can come up with some ideas to help each other. So we start to try and link people up. We start to try and move people away from being individuals, and we start to link them up, and both to help them, you know, just have someone to talk to, someone to share ideas with, but also to come up with collective solutions. So maybe sometimes there are ideas that they can come up with that together they might be able to solve this in a way that they can't individually. So we can cooperate. And finally, I think, because I mean, I showed you that little diagram, our careers are taking place at lots of different levels. And as a career counsellor, or as a career coach, or as an HR professional, I think you should feel free to intervene. I mean, particularly, I think HR professionals, if you're in an organisation, you have a role to act on the system, not just on the individual. So you have a role to try and think, well, look, you know, right, for example, I'm seeing an awful lot of people who are having stress-related problems in one department. Maybe I should go and have a look at what's going on in that department and try and figure out, is it a bad manager? Is it that department has got too much work? Is it under-resourced? What's happening here in the system that I might want to intervene in and change? So sometimes people will be best helped by individual support, you know, a shoulder to cry on, someone to talk to, someone to give them some ideas. But other times it might be about changing and acting on the systems in which they operate. So some contact details for me. My blog is called Adventures in Career Development, if you're interested in this stuff. But what I've been trying to really argue in this session, we've got a bit of time for discussion and questions, I think, here, is that career is where we make our lives in dialogue with others and with institutions and with society. And because of that, it's where we seek justice, we seek to advance our interests and get what we believe is fair for us, but also where we run into obstacles and we find injustice. So when we're supporting people to develop their careers, it's inevitably a process of engaging with social justice. And what I've tried to show you in those 5 signposts is some ways in which we can tweak the kinds of conversations that we have with people to hopefully have conversations which open up some of these issues of justice and give us new solutions to them. Great, thank you for that. And I know we've got quite a bit in the chat. I don't know whether, Claire, you want to pick anything out, or whether there's anything else.
You got an hour? So much there. So one thing that's been mentioned a few times in the Middle East, it's called wasta, it's called different things in different places, nepotism. And there's questions around, you know, is it okay? Should it be named? What way to work with it? So that's one thing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, so one of my colleagues who I worked on this a lot with, his name's Ronald Sultana. He's worked a lot particularly in, so he's from Malta, and he's worked a lot in North Africa and so on. So he's talked a lot about this as being an issue. I think what we have to be really careful about is imposing sort of cultural assumptions on how other countries should. So I'm not going to tell you about how things should be organized, but what I do know, and I have worked a little bit in Gulf states and so on. So I do know that I've heard a lot of people say that they find that really frustrating, that it's not what you know, it's who you know. That now there's some good things in that. It's good that you have networks of support. It's good that people, you know, support each other, help their families out, help their communities out. But I think sometimes people feel that that ultimately ends up being a obstacle to justice. And that's where I think we're trying to give people ways of talking about that. At the very least, let's talk about that with people and make it open for something for people to talk about. But also potentially to raise issues with our organisations about where that's standing in the way of either individuals progressing their careers or actually of the organisation working effectively overall. So yeah, I think absolutely we need to be talking about that with people. We also need to be raising these issues in our organisations and then finding ways to address these and ways around them.
And it's so interesting. From family businesses, it's a major thing, but it's also a major thing in government and corps as well, in terms of nepotism.
Yeah,
so
I mean, I think a lot of careers work. There are a set of assumptions that people should be, that you should be able to progress, and that ultimately one of the things we're trying to do in careers is find the best person for the job.
Yeah.
Now, there's people who question that. There's problems associated with it and so on. But I think that's still something that, it's an appealing idea that we find somebody who's the best person for the job, not just because there's someone who happens to be, the cousin of the boss or whatever. So, I think that if that's the way injustice is manifesting in your context, then at the very least talk about it. At the very least think about whether there's a way forward beyond it.
An ode to meritocracy.
So I believe on that, Claire?
Michael Jackson's. Yeah, I knew you wanted to comment there, Mike.
So Tristram, can you just wind back in your slides to your 5 kind of signposts or whatever it was, and let's talk about nepotism in terms of that. You say start with the individual. So if I go and sort of approach
Mike, just turn your volume up slightly. Sorry to interrupt.
Tristram, can you hear me? 1, 2,
yes,
1, 2.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Right, okay. So I just wanted to, in terms of your signposts, I just think from a career perspective, it would be quite a dangerous career step to take if you were to actually go to the boss's son and say, I don't think you're actually qualified to do this job, or whatever it is. So how would you kind of relate what you just said about trying to call that nepotism out, or to talk about changing the structure in terms of your signposts here?
I mean, I think career and working with, well, as an individual, your career is the art of the possible. It's always the art of the possible, isn't it? We can't, just as we don't say to people, you can do whatever you want. You only have to dream it and it can become true, because we know that in reality, some jobs require qualifications, some jobs require a set of experience and so on. We have to help people to develop their careers in what's possible. And similarly, when we start to think about injustices that we see, the answer shouldn't be, get on your moral high horse and ride it in and tell everyone that you're right and everyone else is wrong, because that's not really how things change. I mean, often I think what we're trying to say is talk about these things with people, open these things up, and don't tell them that when they experience those things, that it's because they're not trying hard enough or they're not working hard enough. Tell them that help them to talk about what's going wrong, but then also try and give them some options to move that forward. And probably in most cases, not every time, but in most cases, that's not going to be, ride in and tell people what you think the right answer is. And it's also not going to be tear down all the structures tomorrow. But I think that's why we sort of say, well, talk about it, question about it, build an analysis, bring people together, intervene at the systems level, at the same time as you're trying to develop your individual career.
Kind of try and co-create a solution.
Yeah, so exactly. Bring people on board. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere without that. So yeah, absolutely. It's got to be realistic. It's got to be the art of the possible.
Cool. Thank you.
I'd also go there to purpose as well, in terms of what is your role as the coach in this, working with this organisation, and fierce courage. How brave are we to call it out, maybe using 360 psychometric data, on their performance, we've then got the data and we're the messenger, so that can support it as well.
And also, I mean, I think one of the things that we have, I mean, it does depend on your role, and people are in lots of different sorts of roles, but one of the situations you're in as somebody who talks to lots of people is that you have an understanding of what a lot of people are experiencing. So you can move it away from being an individual thing about, you know, it's not fair that Bob has not been promoted. I don't think that, you know, that's what the individual can do. They can make that argument. But I think, you know, sometimes it's helpful to advocate on behalf of people. That might be a role that you take. I think one of the things you can do is you can look at the whole system and you can say to somebody, do you know what, we're getting the same problem from the same department in the organization over and over again. I'm not going to tell you exactly who it is. I'm not going to tell you, you know, all the detail, but there's something that needs doing here. There's something that needs looking at. And you can do that in a more, you know, dispassionate way because you've had the same conversation with multiple people. Like I say, if you've got data, even better, you know, if you can give them statistics or whatever, then, you know, businesses love that. But I think even without that, you're collecting data from people when you're doing career coaching with them.
I think that's more likely. You'll have the data from people because a lot of family businesses don't want psychometrics. A lot of families don't want, you know, as far as they're concerned, they're different because they're a family business anyway. So,
and what they need and what they want can be two different things. Valeria, did you have a question, Valerie?
No, I wasn't raising my hand.
Oh. Any other questions?
But I did have a question in the chat about the connection between the 4 levels of intervention and the 5 signposts. I mean, it's kind of intuitive that you're working your way outside of that circle with each signpost actually.
Yeah, so I suppose that little diagram I had with the target on it, I think in reality, life is a bit more complicated than that. And when, so there's a couple of career theorists, Wendy Patton and Mary McMahon, who've written this thing which they call systems theory. And what they have is lots of interlocking, you know, circles. So, you know, if you think about somebody, they've got their work, so they've got their workplace, but they've also part of a system which is the family. They might be a part of a church or a mosque. They might be, you know, they've got lots of different relationships around them, and all of these are important for their career. So I think what I was trying to show there was really that sometimes I think when people approach career as purely from the perspective of psychology, they view it as something which is entirely going on in your brain. Where when you kind of approach it more from a sort of systems theory point of view, you're saying, well, look, no, actually, yes, some of it is going on in your brain, absolutely. It's also going on in your organization. I mean, we were talking in the group we were in about how, you know, somebody who's got children and a husband might have a different experience of their career from somebody who's single. And that's about all of these interlocking systems. And I think our role as when we're helping people with their career has got to be mindful of all these systems, but also where it's appropriate, potentially to advocate and intervene in systems other than just the individual. So perhaps to have a conversation with their parents if you're dealing with a young person, perhaps to have a conversation with the organization if you're dealing with a working person, you know, that kind of thing.
It's really interesting. What do the different stakeholders need? That systems question is really interesting. Any other questions before we close?
Well, sorry, I don't want to sound like hog here, but if nobody else wants to ask a question, I'd just like to ask Tristram about individualism, because you know, it's kind of one of the things that we all do is we want to be individuals. We want to be different to everybody else. But what you're almost supporting here is that we shouldn't entertain any thoughts of oppressionism. So it's kind of, how do you make the distinction between somebody wanting to be a member of a group that helps them maintain their individuality, but at the same time you've got to then avoid any context of that sort of being oppressive in any nature to anybody else?
Yeah, well, it's like the sort of principal problem of politics and philosophy, isn't it? So I'm not sure. But I mean, I think what we're trying to say, I suppose, is, I mean, one of the things is I don't think there's a perfect solution. I don't think you ever. I think social justice is never achieved. It's always struggled towards. So if you set everything up perfectly, you know, let's imagine a situation, and you know, we say, well, you know, we've got this, you know, organization, and it's really racist, and we really deal with that, and we get all of the racism addressed and dealt with. It doesn't mean that there won't ever be any problems again. Even those ones might come back, but you might find that it's actually something else is happening. So I think one of the things is that we're always moving towards, and we're being mindful, and we're trying to, and that's why I think this idea of like critical consciousness is that we're trying to create in ourselves and in individuals people who are paying attention to what's happening in the world, of how power and inequality is operating, and where that is preventing individuals from achieving what they want to and what their potential is. And we try and balance that. And of course, there's always a balance between, you know, equality and individualism, and somehow we're trying to kind of balance those things. So I know that's not a very satisfying answer, because I can't say, oh, you know, it's 42. But I think it is the idea that we recognize that there are tensions in justice, and there are tensions inevitable in organizations and individuals, and that we're trying to balance those in a way that makes the most amount of people happy. And I think that's, you know, that's what hopefully, you know, the idea of social justice is really about.
So just one last kind of, because again, just an interest really, but I know you're a professor of tenureship, and just, is there any interesting reading on this subject that we can maybe pick up on to follow through with this, or?
Well, yes.
Other than yours.
So we did a couple of books. So we've got.
There you go.
We've got a couple of academic books on this, but actually, where would be a more helpful place probably for you to go is we've got a website which is called Career Guidance for Social Justice. I'll just put the link for that in the chat. And I'd really love if people have got things to say about this, or have got examples of things that they think are interesting. Sorry, I'll just send it to Claire rather than to everyone, but there we go. Then we'd love to have articles from people. You'll see it's aimed at a sort of a practitioner group. But if you go on that website as well, you can also see there's information about the books that we've done and so on. But the so that's probably a really good place for you to go if you want to find out more about this sort of thing. And yeah, if you're interested, get in touch. We'd love to feature some case studies and things from people.
Cool. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
So there was one question there about the difference between nested systems and subsystems. So I see nested systems just like teams of teams. Nested systems are systems within systems, whereas subsystems are sort of smaller and broken down. Is there any clearer way to describe, or how would you see that?
I mean, systems theory as a whole, like there's a million books on that, you know, from if you want to look at so there's a thing which is called systems theory of career development. I'll put a link in the chat for that, which
just is looking as well. I've got Barry Oshry's book somewhere, which is great stuff on systems.
So the one I was thinking of was Patton and McMahon, but there's quite a few people working on this kind of stuff. One of my friends, Jim Bright, he talks about chaos theory, but really he's talking about something very, very similar again, really, which is, you know, is about how there are all these different factors. And when you're living a career, you've got to try and balance them and manage them across each other. So I've put the link to the sort of original article on systems theory of career if people are interested to get into this a bit deeper. Great. Well, thank you for listening. It's been a really interesting session, and yeah, good luck with the rest of the 24-hour marathon, Claire.
Thank you so much. That went so far wide, deep, really interesting session. Really appreciate your time, Tristram. Thank you for all the engagement with the questions, everyone. We are back in an hour